Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness with a new wisdom candle. Okay, who's in the house? And I apologize for being a couple minutes late. Who's in the house on a Friday? Sharon in New Jersey, Lucy, Minnesota, Shandora in the Bronx, Gordo in Scotland, Bella in Florida, Gail in Kansas City, Yehuda in South Carolina, Lorraine in Texas, Tom in PA, and Chaim in Florida, Lester in Florida, Frank in San Pedro, and Lynn in Canada. If you're in a super cold place, May the light of this Torah we're going to learn today warm you up a little bit. Say amen. Okay, and Guten Erev Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. Okay, some beautiful stuff today. Our daf is page 28 here in Tractate Menachot, the 30th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 9 here in chapter 3, which God willing will complete and open Mishnah 10. Excuse me. Elon, could you, when you get a chance, give me a glass of water, please? Thank you. Okay, right near the top of page 28a. The master says in the Baraisa, but with regard to the sprinkling of the blood that takes place inside the sanctuary and the sprinkling of the oil that takes place during the purification of the metzorah, if these are performed not for their own sake, then they are not valid. But if they were performed not precisely toward the Holy of Holies, they are valid. Now, we began this discussion yesterday talking about various elements of different offerings, which if they're not all present, the offering is going to be disqualified. So, for example, the sprinklings of blood of inner offerings, like the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, or the goats of a mistake with respect to avodah zarah, or the bull of the anointed priest, or the bull of a Sanhedrin that erred and the nation relied on that erroneous ruling. Those are inner offerings whose sprinklings are done inside the sanctuary. On Yom Kippur, some sprinklings even inside the Holy of Holies. And whatever the exact number of a particular type of sprinkling, usually multiples of 7, all 7 have to be done and done correctly, or the whole thing is disqualified. The 6 that you did correctly are not going to count toward that mitzvah. Thank you so much. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nived. So that's why yesterday I was kind of saying all or none. They all have to be done. and they will prevent the mitzvah from being accomplished if any one of them is missing. We also talked about the ritual of the red heifer, of creating the waters of sprinkling for purification. When the temple was standing, a person would come into contact with the dead, even walking over a grave, then could not enter the temple until they went through that 7-day purification with the sprinkling of that water on the 3rd and 7th day, when that red heifer was slaughtered and then burned to create the ashes that were necessary for the water sprinkling. That was done on the Mount of Olives, opposite the Temple Mount, and the sprinkling that they did over there, again 7 times, had to be in the direction of the sanctuary, right? I mean, it's pretty far off, but it had to be done toward the temple and specifically toward the entrance of the sanctuary. And then there was a dispute whether it had to be exactly toward the entrance. If it was a little bit off, that would not render it not fit. Okay, so continuing this idea of when there are details and elements of the sacrificial process that are indispensable, that have to be carried out exactly as commanded in the Torah, or the offering will be unfit, as opposed to other elements of certain offerings which don't have to be done so precisely, and the offering could still be fit. Now, this idea of doing it for its own sake, that's kind of, calling us back right to the very first Mishna that we started talking about offerings, not in this tractate, Menachot, but in the previous tractate, Zevachim. The very first Mishna on page 2 of Zevachim was that if somebody slaughters a sin offering or a guilt offering or burnt offering, not for its own sake, that offering is going to be disqualified. The sin offering, it stops cold. With a burnt offering, they're going to complete the offering and it's going to be credited to its owner as a gift offering. But if he vowed to bring a burnt offering, he's going to have to bring another one. Okay, so let's just start this again. The master in the Baraisa said, but with regard to the sprinkling of the blood that takes place inside the sanctuary and the sprinkling of the oil that takes place during the purification of the metzorah, if these are performed not for their own sake, so you did the sprinkling correctly, the right number of sprinklings, but the priest doing it had in mind some other offering than the one he was actually sprinkling for, then that offering would be rendered not valid. Or at least the sprinklings would be not valid. Maybe he could, do them correctly if before he goes on and does something else. But if they were performed not precisely toward the Holy of Holies, right, to the direction of sprinkling, then they are valid. So the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in the Baraisa that with regard to the sprinklings of oil during the purification of the metzorah, whether they were performed not for their own sake or whether they were performed not precisely toward the Holy of Holies, they are valid? So the direction it agrees with doesn't have to be precisely toward the Holy of Holies. But what about the sprinkling of oil of the metzorah in terms of for the sake of that particular offering or not? This seems to be a contradiction. One says it does have to be for its sake of that offering. One says it doesn't. So Rav Yosef said, La Kasha, this is not difficult. This first Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And that second Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. And he explains, Rabbi Eliezer is the Tana, that sage of the period of the Mishnah, who juxtaposes the guilt offering to a sin offering, teaching that just as a sin offering is disqualified when sacrificed not for its own sake, so too the guilt offering, such as the guilt offering of a metzorah, is disqualified when sacrificed not for its own sake. As it is written, quote, as is the sin offering, so is the guilt offering. There is one law for them, in Leviticus 7:7. And he also juxtaposes the log, which is a volume, a measure of volume, of oil of the metzorah to the guilt offering of the metzorah in the same verse, teaching that if the sprinkling from the log of oil was performed not for its own sake, it is not valid. In contrast, the rabbis, right, the majority who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, in contrast, the rabbis do not juxtapose the guilt offering to the sin offering, and therefore they have no reason to invalidate the sprinkling from the log of oil of the metzorah that is performed not for its own sake. Now, the Gemara asks, But according to Rabbi Eliezer, is it so that a matter derived via juxtaposition then teaches a law to another case via juxtaposition? Right? If you're going to learn out the missing element in a legal procedure from a law that is situated right next to it in the narrative of the Torah, right? So because they're juxtaposed together, and that other law has this missing element that you need in the next law. So by the juxtaposition of those two laws, can you borrow an element from the first to the second? Okay, so maybe you can. But then are you going to extend from law A to the missing element to law B, and then from law B to law C, with all three juxtaposed like that? Can you extend that element that's missing in law B now to law C, which also is missing that element? And there is a principle that with regard to consecrated matters, a law derived via juxtaposition cannot subsequently teach a law via juxtaposition. Therefore, the necessity for the sprinklings of the log of oil to be performed for its own sake cannot be derived from juxtaposition between the guilt offering of the metzorah and the sprinkling of the oil. So, rather, Rava said, both this baraisa and that baraisa are in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. And here, where the baraisa teaches that the sprinklings are valid, it means that they were effective in rendering the offering valid and allowing the priests to partake of the remainder of the log. Whereas there, where the baraisa teaches that the sprinklings are not valid, it means that they do not effect acceptance, as they do not satisfy the obligation of the owner. And therefore, the metzorah is still prohibited from partaking of sacrificial meat. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 9 here in chapter 3. We're going to move on to Mishnah 10. And again, we're continuing this theme established in the previous Mishnah of which elements of offerings and other sacrificial and consecrated matters that went down and that happened in the temple, in the holy temple, or in the tabernacle during the period of the tabernacle, that are indispensable to the element that they're associated with, to the ritual that they are associated with. And if they are indispensable, then even though you did 80% of it correctly or 90% of it correctly, if every part is indispensable, then that missing 10 or 5 or 1% is going to render that aspect, that ritual, that offering unfit. So let's keep going. Mishnah 10. With regard to the 7 branches of the menorah. Now let's just take a moment to remember that we use the word menorah in the United States. Jews in the United States tend to use the word menorah to mean the Chanukiah, right? The candelabrum that we use at Hanukkah, which generally has important laws and regulations associated with it. But it has 8 lights, right, that have to be on the same level. And then it has the shamash that that is used to light the other ones. It doesn't represent one of the nights. It holds the flame that can be used to light the other ones, right? So that is a 8 branches with one in the center, usually higher than the others, or could even be lower than the others, but on a different level than the 8 lights. Now, when we talk about a menorah in the Holy Temple, we're talking about a 7-branched candelabrum. It's going to have 3 lights on each side, all on the same level, and then one in the center, also on the same level, the same height as the other 6. And this one is in the center, and this is commanded in the Torah, and we're going to be talking about that. And so the Torah seems to be pretty specific about what the menorah, the golden menorah, that's the national menorah, what its requirements are. And is the Torah being exhaustive in its description? Is there room for interpretation? We shall see. Okay. And of course, that 7-branch menorah has been adopted by the modern state of Israel as a national symbol. But we're not going to get too much into this here, but it is interesting that there is this little illustration here that I want to share with you. That is in the handwriting and, by the artistic hand of the Rambam. So that is drawn actually by Rambam, by Rabbi Moses Maimonides, as the candelabrum, right? The menorah in the Holy Temple. And you can see that it has the 7 branches. Now, he was not trying to be accurate in certain respects. He was trying to illustrate certain points that were important to him. Chief among those is that the 6 branches, right, 3 on one side, 3 on the other, are straight. And you will notice that if you think about the national symbol of Israel, and how that menorah is often rendered in various kinds of literature, it's with a curve, right? So it goes kind of like it curves around and up, and that here the Rambam's goes out straight. That discrepancy, and there's a lot of argumentation. There are whole books written on this subject. It seems to be that there's definitely a lot of scholars, and I'm talking about in the religious Jewish world, deep scholars, who would say that it's quite possible, especially Chabad scholars would tell you this, it's quite possible that there were multiple menorahs associated with the Holy Temple. We know that when Solomon built the first temple, he definitely added additional menorahs. It wasn't just the one menorah. There was the one menorah that sort of did the job of being the menorah and the lights and having its lights lit at the right time, etc. And then he added additional menorahs in the sanctuary. And so what's so interesting about this is that it may well be that there were both in ancient times the straight branch menorah and the curved menorahs. And there's just disagreement over the national menorah, was it straight branched or did it have curved branches? And, I don't know if we're going to find out. There's definitely some people who believe that at least one of those menorahs is to be found in the Vatican, but they're not giving it up so quick. All kinds of theories about that. And Yoel Gold made a really interesting documentary you can find on his website. I forget what the title of it is, but if you look up Rabbi Yoel Gold and the Menorah in the Vatican documentary, you can find that on his website. It's fascinating. Okay, but where you do see this discrepancy in modern times is that if you notice any Chabad synagogue, any Chabad rabbi, any Chabadnik, any Chabad person, will have a straight branched Hanukkah menorah with the 8 lights, but with straight arms. Whereas most other people will have the curved branches. And you'll see that in Guns N' Moses as well. On the day we shot that scene, it was a curved menorah. Just hadn't had a chance to discuss this with the production designer. The wrong kind of menorah showed up. What could I do? There were so many other things to deal with, but it bothered me. And then in post-production, when we were doing all kinds of things with visual effects, adding muzzle flashes, changing road signs, all kinds of stuff, I said, I think we could change this menorah and make it accurate for what would be in the home of a Chabad rabbi like Rabbi Mo. And so in the movie, you will see a straight-branched Hanukkah menorah. Okay, let's get into it. So Mishnah 10. With regard to the 7 branches of the menorah, the absence of each prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others. So if one of the branches fell off the menorah, now we're not talking about Hanukkah menorahs, we're talking about the menorah in the Holy Temple. And if one of the branches fell off, the whole menorah would be rendered unfit. It would not be that the priest lighting the other 6 lights, let's say, in the morning of a day at the Holy Temple, that he would be fulfilling any mitzvah at all, because once that menorah lost one of the branches, that would be an unfit menorah, and any lights that are lit on top of it would not be fulfilling a mitzvah. Now, with regard to its 7 lamps atop the branches, the absence of each prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others. With regard to the 2 passages, this would be written passages from the Torah that are in a mezuzah that we put on the doorposts of our house. These are the first 2 paragraphs of the Shema prayer from Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 through 9, and Deuteronomy 11, verses 13 through 21. So there's 2 paragraphs in any mezuzah. And the absence of each would prevent fulfillment of the mitzvah with the other. Furthermore, the absence of even 1 letter prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the rest of them. So mezuzah provides 24/7 protection on any Jewish home, but only if it is a fit mezuzah. And if even 1 letter has become damaged, and often mezuzahs are outside, and they're meant to be waterproof and really protect the scroll inside. But over time, water damage, moisture can happen, and that's why you're supposed to have your mezuzahs checked by a proper scribe, a sofer, twice in every 7 years. And yet, you have to do it. Like, you have to really take out the scrolls from every mezuzah, get them to a sofer, label which mezuzahs they came from. He looks them all over. I did this not that long ago, and we did find that there was 1 letter that had become, a little bit blurred in one of the scrolls of one of the mezuzahs, and so we had to replace that. And of course, they have to be properly written scrolls. They have to be, handwritten by a scribe on the proper kind of parchment, very similar to a Torah scroll. So, if you bought a mezuzah with just like a Xerox copy scroll inside and put that on your house, so you don't have a mezuzah on your house. And just remember that the outside case, often very pretty, sometimes very expensive, that's not the mezuzah. That's a decorative housing, a decorative container, or a protective container against the elements on the outside. But the mezuzah is the scroll that is inside that container, the handwritten scroll. With regard to the 4 passages that are in the, so my translation here says phylacteries, such a weird word. I guess it's a Greek-based English word, but it's tefillin, and I think more people have heard of tefillin than phylacteries. So we're talking about tefillin, right? The black box on our arm with the straps, and the black box over the head, on the forehead with the 2 straps that come around, that Jewish men wear in the morning, 6 days a week when we are praying. We don't wrap tefillin on Shabbos nor on holidays. Okay, with regard to the 4 passages that are inside those black boxes, which are the 2 passages in the mezuzah and 2 additional passages, Exodus 13, 1 through 10, and 11 through 16. The absence of each prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others. Furthermore, the absence of even 1 letter prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the rest of them. With regard to the 4 tzitzis, right, the ritual fringes, this garment that I have under my shirt here, this is called an arba kanfot. And that means it has 4 corners, and there's a tzitzis, this fringe, on each of the 4 corners, and you have to have all 4, right? So, furthermore, so with regard to the tzitzis on a garment, the absence of each prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others, as the 4 of them constitute 1 mitzvah. Having the 4 tzitzis, the 4 fringes on the 4 corners of that garment, that is 1 mitzvah. Rabbi Yishmael is in the minority on this, and he says the 4 of them are 4 distinct mitzvahs, and the absence of 1 does not prevent fulfillment of the mitzvah with the rest. But we don't hold like Rabbi Yishmael. Right. That's the Mishnah number 10. Now we move on to the Gemara. What is the reason that the absence of any of the 7 branches of the menorah prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others? The Gemara answers, it is written concerning them a term of being, quote, their knobs and their branches shall be of one piece with it, in Exodus 25:36. And as we've seen, this particular verb, this existential verb, a term of being, in the Torah in these situations indicates an indispensable requirement. And the sages taught in Chulin 1:18, the menorah was fashioned from a complete block, ha'eshet, and from gold. Right? So it's not that difficult to melt gold. So you might have thought that they would create a mold, melt the gold, pour it into the mold, and then remove the front and back of the mold, and there would be your menorah. That is not how they would fabricate the menorah, because it says in the Torah it's going to be hammered out of a block of gold. Right? So the goldsmith would start with a block of gold and then just hammer it. Gold is actually quite a soft metal, and he would just hammer it out and sort of push it into place and make that 7-branch menorah out of a single block of gold. If they fashioned it from fragments of gold, then it is unfit. Right? I mean, think of the way that modern things are assembled. They don't come from a single block of anything. You could take a bunch of components, and then you weld them together, solder them together, button them together, staple them together. There's some kind of inner frame made of plastic or wood or something like that, and then these things are attached to it, but they're made from distinct pieces. That's how everything is assembled in China, right? But not the menorah. So it can't be made from pieces of gold. If it was made from pieces, or in this translation, fragments, it would be unfit. But if they fashioned it from other types of metal other than gold, then it would be fit, presumably if it was assembled in pieces. So the Gemara asks, what is different about a menorah made from fragments of gold that it is rendered unfit? As it is written with regard to it, quote, their knobs and their branches shall be of one piece with it. The whole of it, one beaten work of pure gold. And where does it say that? Exodus 25:36. Employing the term beaten, miksha, and a term of being, indicating that it is an indispensable requirement. But accordingly, a menorah fashioned from other types of metal should be rendered unfit as well, since the verb states that it is made of gold and uses a term of being. So how could you say that a menorah could be made of any other metal than gold? And the Gemara answers that the verse states, and you shall make a menorah of pure gold. Of beaten work will the menorah be made. And the way that the sages read that is that this now includes other types of metal. And the Gemara asks, but why not say that the expression will be made serves to include a menorah fashioned from fragments of gold, right? If you're saying that the verse that commands that it be made of gold and from one piece of gold, and that there was additional words that weren't necessary there, and that they come to allow a menorah to be made of other types of metal, why not say it comes to allow a menorah to be made of different pieces of gold assembled together? Why not? And the Gemara answers, it cannot enter your mind to say this, as the term of being, which indicates an indispensable requirement, is written with regard to the command that the menorah be a beaten work, i.e. fashioned from a single block, and not from different fragments, as it is stated, shall be of one beaten work. So since that's indispensable, sounds like you could make it out of some other piece of kind of metal. And the Gemara challenges, excuse me. The Gemara challenges this. But the term will be made is also written with regard to the command that the menorah be a beaten work. As it is written, of beaten work will the menorah be made. So the Gemara answers, the term beaten work appears in Exodus 25:31, and the term beaten work appears again in Exodus 25:36 to demonstrate that this requirement is indispensable. Okay, so beaten work from a single block, that's indispensable. Is gold an indispensable factor or not? So the Gemara says, well, but the term gold appears in Exodus 25:31, and the term gold appears again in Exodus 25:36. Why would you also not say as well to demonstrate that this requirement is indispensable? Why would you, say question either one? Both are repeated. The term of being is included. So it sounds like it needs to be made out of gold, and it needs to be made out of one block of beaten work. So the Gemara answers, what is this comparison? Granted, if you say that the menorah is fashioned from fragments of gold, that a menorah that is fashioned from fragments of gold is unfit, but when fashioned from other types of metal, it is fit, then this is the reason that it was necessary for the verse to state gold, and then gold again, beaten work, and then beaten work again, to teach an interpretation, which is going to be explained in a moment. But if you say that when the menorah is fashioned from fragments of gold, it is fit, but when fashioned from other types of metal, it is unfit, so what do you interpret from the repeated terms gold, gold, and beaten work, beaten work? So the Gemara explains, what interpretation are we talking about? As it is taught in the Baraisa, the verse states in Exodus 25:39, of a talent of pure gold will it be made with all these vessels. Now, a talent does not refer to human skills. A talent is a measure of weight. So we're talking about a certain amount of pure gold. So of a talent of pure gold will it be made with all these vessels. This verse teaches that if the menorah is fashioned of gold, it must be fashioned with the precise weight of a talent. And if it is not fashioned of gold, but of other types of metal, then it need not be fashioned with the precise weight of a talent. And similarly, the verse, and you will make a menorah of pure gold, of beaten work, shall the menorah be made, even its base, its shaft, its goblets, its knobs, and its flowers. Exodus 25:31, which teaches that if the menorah is fashioned of gold, it must be fashioned with goblets, knobs, and flowers. And if it is not fashioned of gold, but of other types of metal, then it does not need to be fashioned with goblets, knobs, and flowers. The Gemara asks, okay, but then why not also say with regard to the branches of the menorah, which are described in Exodus 25:31, along with the term gold, that if the menorah is fashioned of gold, it must be fashioned with branches, but if it is not fashioned of gold, but of other types of metal, then it does not need to have branches at all. Why not say that? And the Gemara answers, a vessel like that is not called a menorah. That's called a candlestick. With regard to the second derivation mentioned, the Gemara elaborates, the verse states, and this was the work of the menorah, beaten work of gold, to the base thereof, and to the flowers thereof, it was beaten work. That's in Numbers 8:4. Right? There's a bunch of assumptions being made here. As so often happens, they're not deriving the simplest rules and then building up to more complicated rules. They just assume we know the simple rules, right? But what you're seeing is there's several repetitions, right, of gold, the menorah of gold. Now, once they established, when the Torah said you have to make it of gold, the fact that they keep referring to it as being of gold is coming to tell us information. So I think the basic concept here is it should be made of gold, but already the Torah contemplates that there may be situations where you can't make one out of gold. The nation doesn't have enough money. Gold isn't available. You still need to light the lamps in the holy temple. So it should be made of gold. Ideally, it's made of gold. But if you can't make it of gold, then there's going to be, some of these rules are going to apply to the non-gold menorah and some won't. And that's really what they're trying to figure out here. All right? And this was the work of the menorah, beaten work of gold to the base thereof and the flowers thereof, and it was beaten work in Numbers 8:4. And this teaches that if the menorah is fashioned of gold, right? If it's made of gold, it must be fashioned as a beaten work. But if it is not fashioned of gold, but of other types of metal, then it does not need to be fashioned as a beaten work and may be made from individual pieces assembled together. And the Gemara asks, for what purpose does the term beaten work that is repeated again in the latter clause of the verse come? And the Gemara answers, it comes to exclude the trumpets, teaching that they are fit even if they are not fashioned from a single block. Were there gold trumpets in the Holy Temple? No, there were silver trumpets. And those silver trumpets were made from a single block and hammered out of silver. As it is taught in a Baraisa, the silver trumpets that Moses was commanded to fashion in the wilderness were to be fashioned from a complete block and from silver. If one fashioned them from fragments, they are fit, but if you fashion them from other types of metal, they are unfit. Now, those are the laws of the silver trumpets. They're not going to be the same as the laws of the gold menorah. Now, the Gemara asks, and what is different about trumpets made from other types of metal that they are rendered unfit? As it is written with regard to the trumpets, quote, make for yourself 2 trumpets of silver, of beaten work you shall make them, and they shall be for you for the calling of the congregation. Numbers 10:2. And the verse employs the terms silver and being, indicating that it is an indispensable requirement. But accordingly, trumpets fashioned from fragments should be rendered unfit as well, since the verse employs the terms beaten work and, right, that kind of verb, the status of being, which renders these elements indispensable. So the Gemara answers, the merciful one excludes the trumpets when it states with regard to the menorah, it was beaten work in Numbers 8:4, indicating that it alone, the menorah, but not the trumpets, must be of beaten work. At least in that passage. Okay, weiter, onward. We move on to a slightly different topic. The sages taught in a Baraisa, all of the vessels that Moses fashioned were fit for his generation and were fit for future generations. Yet the trumpets that Moses fashioned were fit for his generation, but were unfit for future generations. Now we're on page 28b. So what are we talking about? Vessels. So those are the service vessels that were used in the Holy Temple. We've been talking about them a lot, right? That were used to collect the blood of an animal offering, or were used to collect the meal offering to measure it, or the handful was removed from a meal offering and sanctified in another service vessel. These are the service vessels that we're talking about. And so about the service vessels, many were fashioned in the time of Moses, and they remain fit for use, daily use, by the priests serving in the tabernacle. And if any of them survived that many centuries, eventually in the Holy Temple. That was built by Solomon in Jerusalem. But the silver trumpets that were used by the children of Israel, and their fashioning was probably supervised by Moses, in the wilderness, those were not used later in the tabernacle and the temple. Why? Let's see. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that the trumpets from Moses' time were unfit for future generations? If we say that it is because the verse states, quote, make for you 2 silver trumpets in Numbers 10:2, meaning that they are fit for you, right, in your generation, Moses, but not for future generations, well, that's difficult because it also says, make for you an ark of wood in Deuteronomy 10:1. And if there were the case that make for you means only for this generation, well, then that would teach that the ark in the wilderness was fit only for you and your generation, but not for future generations. And this cannot be the law, as the Baraisa stated explicitly that all vessels other than the trumpets that were fashioned by Moses were fit for future generations, and that would include the Aron Kodesh, the Ark of the Covenant. So rather, the term for you that is written with regard to the fashioning of the ark should be understood either according to the one who says that for you means from your own property, or according to the one who says that God said to Moses, this is God speaking, I desire, as it were, that the ark be fashioned from your property more than I desire that it be fashioned from the property of the rest of the nation. This is discussed in Tractate Yoma 3b. Accordingly, here too, with regard to the trumpets, the term for you should be understood in this manner. And the Gemara responds, there with regard to the trumpets, it is different. As the verse states, for you twice, make for you 2 trumpets of silver of beaten work, you shall make them, and they shall be for you for the calling of the congregation in Numbers 10:2. Very interesting. The discussion is moving on, but it's like, what does that even mean? I'll just mention what the law says here. The menorah and its vessels, the table and its vessels, the incense altar, and all other service vessels must be fashioned from some form of metal and may be fashioned even from tin. If they were made from wood, bone, or glass, they are unfit. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe. Since in a disagreement between Rebbe and a colleague of his, the law is in accordance with his opinion. It is also in accordance with the Baraisa taught by Rav. Right? And now, will we find that ruling in Shulchan Aruch? No, because when it comes to poskening a halacha with respect to things that happen in the temple and in ancient times, Shulchan Aruch doesn't address that, right? Where we look to for a final ruling based on, reading the entire Talmud and concluding where the law came out, is we look to Rambam in the Mishnah Torah. Okay. So in terms of the trumpets, why is it that they needed to be silver or not need to be silver? So interesting, this idea that God, sort of, when you talk about the personal wealth of leaders, that can be a very uncomfortable subject. We're always worried about corruption, etc. I don't think we have to ever worry about Moses, and his own property. But because Moses was so busy leading the nation, did he even have the opportunity to make his own contributions the way everybody else, contributed to the raw materials from which the tabernacle were made and the service vessels were made, etc.? And the answer is, according to this, yes. Right? He had some personal property. I mean, he did grow up as a prince in Egypt. He did work for his father-in-law Yisro for a long time. And he had some means of his own. And we have a teaching elsewhere that just kind of some leftover things, even the broken tablets, God said, you can keep that, and that made Moses wealthy. But really what that did, he never had a chance to spend any money. Just leading the nation from dawn till dusk, always busy with that for the last 40 years of his life. Independent wealth, it was meaningless to him, but except that it allowed him to contribute certain items to the nation, perhaps like the silver of those trumpets. Okay, now the Gemara relates that Rav Papa, the son of Rav Chanin, taught a baraisa before Rav Yosef. The menorah could be fashioned from a complete block and from gold. If one fashioned it from silver, it is fit. If one fashioned it from tin or from lead or from other types of metal, Rebbe deems it unfit, and Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, deems it fit. If one fashioned it from wood or from bone or from glass, everyone agrees that it is unfit. Rabbi Yosef said to him, what in your opinion is the explanation of the dispute between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda? Rav Papa, the son of Rav Chanan, said to him, both this sage and that sage interpret the verse, And you shall make a menorah of pure gold, of beaten work will the menorah be made, by means of the principle of generalizations and details. So the verse begins with a generalization. You shall make a menorah, followed by a detail of pure gold, which is then followed by another generalization. Will the menorah be made? Right? Why do you need will the menorah be made? When it says you're going to make a menorah of gold, we would think, okay, I get it. I'm going to make a menorah and I'm going to make it of gold. So then why would we add, will the menorah be made? Right? That has to come to modify the first command in some way. What is that way? So according to the hermeneutic principle of generalizations and details, this teaches that any item that is similar to the detail is also deemed fit. So what is similar to the detail? It's of gold. What's similar to of gold? Of silver, of tin, of lead, of copper, right? Of metal. But the other sage, Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, holds that just as the item mentioned in the detail is clearly defined as a type of metal, so too all other types of metal may be used in fashioning the menorah. And the other sage, Rebbe, holds that just as the item fashioned in the detail is clearly defined as an item of substantial value, so too all items of substantial value may be used in fashioning the menorah. Rav Yosef said to him, remove your baraisa in light of my baraisa. Rav Yosef continued, as it is taught in the baraisa, with regard to temple service vessels that one fashioned from wood, Rebbe deems them unfit, and Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, deems them fit. According to this baraisa, their dispute was with regard to a menorah fashioned from wood, not from metal. Rav Yosef explains, with regard to what principle do they disagree? Rebbe interprets verses by means of the principle of generalizations and details, and Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, interprets verses by means of the principle of amplifications and restrictions. A slightly different way to derive laws that are not explicitly spelled out in the Torah, but where we need answers to questions. Can we do this? Can we do that? So there's a system of hermeneutics. But here we have systems that can produce different answers. So one sage is applying generalizations and details, the other sage is applying amplifications and restrictions, and here we see how they arrive at slightly different answers because of the different hermeneutical principles that they're employing. Rebbe interprets the verse, and you shall make a menorah of pure gold, of beaten work, will the menorah be made, right? And you will make a menorah of pure gold, of beaten work, will the menorah be made. I could have said, you will make a menorah, it shall be of gold and of beaten work. Since it was not phrased that way, what are we to learn from the way it actually is phrased? So Rebbe interprets this by means of the principle of generalizations and details. And you will make a menorah of. This is a generalization, as the material of the menorah has not yet been specified. Pure gold. This is a detail, limiting the material exclusively to gold. If it had stopped there, we would know that a menorah must be made of gold. But then it adds, of beaten work will the menorah be made. This is a generalization, and the result is a generalization and a detail and a generalization, from which you may deduce that the verse is referring only to items that are similar to the detail, and that leads to this conclusion: just as an item mentioned in the detail is clearly defined as a type of metal, so too all other types of metal may be used in fashioning the menorah. That's how we get to the menorah should be made of gold, but it can be made of other kinds of metal, according to Rebbe. By contrast, Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, interprets the verse by means of the principle of amplifications and restrictions. How does this work? And you will make a menorah of, this is an amplification, as the material of the menorah is not specified. Pure gold, this is a restriction, limiting the material exclusively to gold. And by then adding, of beaten work will the menorah be made, the verse repeated and amplified. And there is a hermeneutical principle that when a verse amplified and then restricted and then amplified, it amplified the relevant category to include everything except the specific matter that was excluded in the restriction. And what did the verse include? It includes all materials, even wood. And what did the verse exclude with the restriction? It excluded a menorah fashioned from earthenware, which is furthest in quality from gold. So according to this, all we did is we excluded one thing that's furthest away from fine materials. That's going to be earthenware. That's the cheapest material. But presumably everything else is going to be possible. So Rav Papa, the son of Rav Chanan, said to him, on the contrary, remove your baraisa in light of my baraisa. And Rav Yosef responded, that cannot enter your mind, as it is taught in another baraisa, if the one who is fashioning the menorah has no gold, he may bring even a menorah made of silver, of copper, of iron, of tin, or of lead. Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, deems it fit even if it was fashioned from wood. It is evident from this baraisa that the dispute pertains only to a menorah fashioned from wood, and Rebbe agrees that it may be fashioned from other types of metal. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. And it is taught in another baraisa. A person may not construct a house in the exact form of the sanctuary, nor a portico corresponding to the entrance hall of the sanctuary, nor a courtyard corresponding to the temple courtyard, nor a table corresponding to the table in the temple, nor a menorah corresponding to the menorah in the temple. Right? You can't make a recreation of the holy temple for the purpose of it like living in your house, I think you can have like a little model like the one I have here. You can even have a full-size recreation as a museum type of thing, maybe. But certainly not to be your home. Okay, hold on. This is making me sign in again. Very annoying. 533-318. 533-318. Okay. Where am I? Okay, nor a menorah corresponding to the menorah in the temple. But one may fashion a menorah of 5 or of 6 or of 8 branches. And one may not fashion a menorah of 7 branches. And this is the law even if he constructs it from other kinds of metal rather than gold, since the menorah that was used in the temple may be fashioned out of other metals. And that baraisa continues that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, one may not even fashion a menorah from wood in the manner that the kings of the Hasmonean monarchy did in the temple. The menorah used in the temple in the time of the Hasmonean kings, now this is the kings who came to power after the story of Hanukkah, this is late Second Temple. The menorah used in the temple in the time of the Hasmonean kings was fashioned from wood. And the rabbis said to Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Yehuda, you seek to bring a proof from there. In the time of the Hasmoneans, the menorah was not fashioned from wood, but rather from spits of iron. And they covered them with tin. Later, when they grew richer, right, and were not involved in a war against the ruling Greeks, then they could afford to fashion a menorah of higher quality material. Then they fashioned the menorah from silver. And when they grew again richer, they fashioned the menorah from gold. Right? So in all cases, it's meant to be from gold, but it's only if you can't get the gold to make the menorah for the national menorah that you can make it from some other metal until the nation can afford to make it from gold. That's where we will knock off and continue, God willing, tomorrow night after Shabbos ends. Just going to take a couple of comments. Ooh, it's a little small for me. Let me see if I can make that bigger. Okay. Sharon. Since the Hebrew word menorah simply means a lamp, or here they're translating it as candelabrum, and is so still now, might the non-gold menorahs simply be lamps and not ritual objects? I think what you're saying is, could the discussion that these sages are having not be about the menorah in the temple, the holy menorah, but rather just about lamps generally? I think not, because in the context, since they keep coming back to the verses in the Torah describing the national menorah that would stand, at the tabernacle or in the temple later, I would say that from the context, they are talking about the 7-branched golden menorah of the nation. Tom, did they have any historical information on what the temple vessels were actually fashioned from? I believe so. It's tough, right? It's tough because the first temple, Solomon's temple, was just sacked and destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. Prior to that destruction, they hid certain things like the Ark of the Covenant. And that's why it was missing in the second temple once they rebuilt it after the return from the Babylonian exile. They were much poorer then. The Jews didn't have sovereignty over the Holy Land in the Second Temple period. It was part of other empires. And so it was difficult. And so this idea that they couldn't do it the ideal way, they had to get a ruling from the halakhic authorities in those days and do the best they could, so to speak. And then eventually they were able to get back to having, a golden menorah, might indicate that they also, with respect to vessels that were being used every day, it seems like, it's pretty clear that they needed to be metal vessels. Did they have silver vessels? Did they have gold vessels? How many did they have? How beautiful were they? Elsewhere here in the Koran Talmud that comes with illustrations, they had, some illustrations of vessels that were used in the temple. So how would they know that? I mean, presumably some survived archaeologically or otherwise. Maybe they were, I don't know where they were from. I don't know enough about biblical archaeology and what's been preserved and what hasn't. But it seems like they had a pretty good idea of what these vessels look like, and even the stands that held the vessels when they weren't in use. Some of the vessels couldn't stand on their own by design, so you couldn't put it down, right? So once the priest took it up, he'd have to use it, capture the blood, take it to the altar, sprinkle, and then eventually replace it on its stand, but he couldn't put it down or it would just fall over. And how do they know that? I mean, maybe it was a written description, but it seems like they had some kind of physical, models that had survived and they had reason to know these things. But I am the farthest thing from any kind, forget expert, even knowledgeable about biblical archaeology. Bill, I'm wondering, so the Daf offers the examples of unfit materials for the trumpets as wood, bone, or glass. Now, bone trumpets, perhaps, maybe you could swing, not fundamentally different from horn, but it definitely wouldn't sound the same. Wood and glass, in turn, would sound awful. Maybe part of what makes them unfit is that the trumpets are meant to sound good. That sounds like really logical, and I would agree with you. But I think that in terms of these derivations, they're really looking to what does the Torah allow us to do and not allow us to do. And the practical question is a different question, right? Now, often they will arrive at a practical answer and say so. But that's not necessarily the first or foremost analysis. I agree with you. Like, what would a wood trumpet sound like? And as I mentioned yesterday, and I did make the video about it today, this idea of the Yovel, teaching us that, when God spoke to the people right before the revelation at Mount Sinai, that the Yovel was mentioned, that was meant to be understood as a shofar blast, right, from a horn. And then there's also the description of sort of the sound of the shofar not coming from a shofar. God didn't blow a shofar, right? So this idea of the Yovel, or just the sound, the ongoing blast of the shofars, as God appeared at Mount Sinai, it's not like there was any person blowing the shofar. I don't think that God, was bringing these massive shofars and causing wind to blow through them. God just made that sound, right? It's a great thing to just reflect on for a second, that when God appeared at Mount Sinai, the Torah tells us that all the people heard the sound of the shofar getting louder and louder, along with thunder and lightning and other kinds of sound leading to, hearing God's voice. But the fact that when God wants to manifest God's presence and God's power and let us know that we're talking about holy matters and the commandments and connection with Hashem, connection with God, that's accompanied by the sound of the shofar. So that when we do hear the sound of the shofar, there's a reason why it stirs us. It just speaks to something inside of us. And I also read a note, I think it was here, maybe it was in the Tanakh, yesterday, that shofar sound that was heard at Mount Sinai, I think was understood, spiritually speaking, maybe literally, to be coming from the left horn of the ram that God provided to be sacrificed in place of Isaac in the incident of the Akedas Yitzhak, right? The Akedah. When God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, he was prepared to do it because he would do anything God said. And of course, it was a test, and he didn't have to sacrifice his son. And a ram was provided in its place, in his place. And that's why, right, we can make shofars out of many different animals, but properly when we blow the shofar on Yom Kippur, and I know not everyone does, but at least in many circles in the Orthodox world, it really needs to be a ram's horn. Like this one that I often blow, this is a kudu horn, has a great sound. And some synagogues will use that, but not on Yom Kippur. It would be better to have a ram's horn on Yom Kippur. And so that left horn was the one at Mount Sinai, and the right horn of that ram, that particular ram in history that was sacrificed, provided by God and sacrificed in place of Isaac, the right horn of that ram, we're going to hear it when Mashiach comes. Right? Beautiful, beautiful teaching. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, see you tomorrow when Shabbos ends here in LA. I think last week I got on about 7:30, maybe a little later, so something like that, 7:30, 7:45-ish. It all depends on how late we run at Shul, get back, do Havdalah. There's various things we do right after Shabbos until I can get on the air with you. In the meantime, may we hear only good news as we enter Shabbos, during Shabbos, and come out of Shabbos. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers. Good Shabbos.